On today's show, Ovechkin's next chapter starts on September 10th.
Hey, this is Ryan Leonard from the Washington Capitals. Tune in to my favorite podcast, Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello, and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Dan HOLMI, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Join all the action at FanDuel.com to play daily dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a homer this MLB season. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the biggest question hanging over this season, whether Ovechkin knows if this is his final NHL season, because, well, right now, we do not. A bit later in the show, we'll get into the NHL 27 ratings, where Ovechkin has fallen below 90 overall, and for just the second time ever, he isn't the highest rated Capital. But where we will start today is September 10th, and how we should all have that circled on our calendar. That is when Ovechkin plans to leave Russia for North America. And, well, once he gets back, the countdown begins in earnest. We have camp, preseason, right? Then October 2nd in Carolina. This isn't, some distant conversation about what Ovechkin's career might look like. We are getting closer to finding out. So welcome into this Tuesday edition of Locked On Capitals, talking about the countdown starts. Because the biggest takeaway is this: September 10th is the real starting gun for Ovechkin's 22nd season. Not necessarily his final season countdown, right? Because I think it's clear to make that statement out there, right? That I've guessed, many have guessed, when his final NHL season is going to be. And I think Ovechkin has made it abundantly clear that only he knows when it's over, that he is calling his own shot when it comes to when his career ends. Because I don't want to sit here and tell you that 26-27 is his final season, because Ovechkin himself said that he doesn't know. Because as early as August 16th, or most recently, when he was asked directly whether this would be his final season, his answer was pretty simple, saying, quote, "Anything is possible. We'll see." So he said he doesn't know yet. So let's set that out from the beginning. This is Ovechkin's 22nd season in the league. It could be his last, but it could also be the season before he makes the decision. That is the story. And now we have a date attached to it. But what we do know is that September 10th is coming, and Match TV reported that Ovechkin plans to leave Russia for North America on September 10th. According to a source close to the situation, trying to sound very political on you. That's a little different from saying Ovechkin is flying directly to DC. What we know is that he will be going to North America if he makes a stop first. I guess that remains to be seen. He plans to leave Russia for North America on September 10th. That would put him back in DC roughly 10 days before the Caps play their first preseason game. And TASS had previously reported that his travel plans were set for early September, so this tracks according to what we've heard. Ovechkin has been training this summer in Moscow, and according to everything that we've heard, is going according to plan. But now the North America test is next. The Capitals in 26-27, right? That's important because right now the season is still a bit, I guess we could say, theoretical. We're talking about line combinations, his age, the goal record, talking about whether this could be his final year. But once Ovechkin gets back, then we will be talking about actual hockey, because camp is going to be here sooner than any of us think. Some Caps players are already back at the informal skates at MedStar. The first preseason game, if you can believe it, is September 20th at Boston. Then they play Philly, Boston, Philly again. So if Ovechkin leaves Russia right on September 10th and gets back into DC shortly thereafter, you've got roughly 10 days before that first preseason puck drop. So not a tremendous amount of time for an Ovechkin in his 40s, especially right when the coaching staff is trying to figure out new combinations. We've all spitballed and thinking who's going to be playing on that first line, second line, right? And especially, when this roster looks markedly different, that the forward group has significantly changed in a good way. Not completely, but I would say significantly. You got Tuch and Kyrou and Jenner, and the Caps have added more size and physicality around the core than they had last season. And this gives Spencer Carberry some big decisions to make because it is a different team. And Chris Patrick made one thing abundantly clear, leaning into size. And you can hear that philosophy coming through the players. Carberry talked about it. The players have talked about what it feels like to have more size around them. And I think that could matter more than people think because the Caps don't need to become the fastest team in the NHL. I don't think that is ever going to be the case. What they can do is make every shift miserable. That being fast is a positive and it has, pluses that are associated, but also being a heavy physical team, making every shift miserable, there is some value in that as well. And I think the Capitals are leaning more into being a heavy and making every shift for the opponent miserable. Still not a slow team, but like I said, I don't think we'll ever be the fastest team. They can make teams work to get through the neutral zone, protect pucks, win battles, right? All the things that you have to do. And then when Ovechkin gets to the offensive zone, you still have to account for him. And I think that is the identity that the Caps are building. And honestly, I like it. It's not trying to recreate the 2018 team. It's trying to build something that fits the roster they actually have in the 26-27 season. But the one thing I know for sure is the schedule is rather brutal. The Caps open the regular season on October 2nd at Carolina against the defending Stanley Cup champions. Talk about jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire. That we will see if Tuch, Kyrou, and Jenner, Desharnais, was that theoretical improvements or was it actual improvements? Then they play October 3rd at Tampa, a team that knows a thing or two about cups as well. Back-to-back 2 road games, right? It is not going to be easy. 2 legitimate Eastern Conference opponents. And welcome to the new season, right? And then there's another really interesting schedule quirk. The Caps will open and close the full regular season with multi-game road trips. They've never previously done that under a normal NHL schedule. They open with Carolina and Tampa Bay. They finish with Columbus, Ottawa, and Philly. And the final game is April 10th, 2027 in Philly. Now, if Ovechkin eventually decides this is his last season and wants a Gretzky style low-key ending, Philadelphia could be where the final game happens. You might want to buy your tickets already, but that is the speculation. It isn't some predetermined farewell destination. So I don't want you to jump to that conclusion because Ovechkin hasn't decided what the ending looks like. But changes to this year as well and what it means for Ovi, the 84-game season. That's another wrinkle to this season. The NHL is moving to an 84-game regular season in 26-27, the first expansion from 82 games since 93-94. And for what is going to be a 41-year-old Ovechkin, I think that workload management becomes more important than ever, which is why it's good that we got better options, that it's not just Ovi driving the bus. Not because I think that, Ovi needs to play all 84 games. I think, and as a matter of fact, it would be advantageous if he didn't. If the Caps want Ovechkin healthy for April, especially if it looks like the season is going well, I think managing his workload could be one of Carberry's biggest jobs. And that is where depth becomes very valuable. If you have a deeper forward group, you can take some of the pressure off Ovechkin. You don't need him playing massive minutes in October, against Columbus. You need him healthy in the spring, in April, when every shift matters. That's the difference between managing, what I'm going to call an aging superstar, if you will, and actually maximizing one. The road trip test as well. The longest road trip is a 6-game Western swing from December 3rd through December 15th. 6 games, everything that entails, multiple time zones. This is not the kind of stretch where you find out what a team actually is. And this is where the cap size could either become a weapon or a problem, right? Because physical teams can wear down opponents, but physical teams can also get exposed if they can't keep up. So that will be a question to watch this season. And can this roster use its size without becoming slow? And I don't want to lean into them being slow. I don't think that's the case. Kyrou can scoot. Tuch, right, has some wheels, sort of. There's players on this team, Ethan Frank, that can move. But what I'm talking about is that, it's a safe thing. And I think you'd be sticking your head into the sand to say that the Capitals didn't get a lot bigger. They were a big team and got a lot bigger. But it is a question. Can this bigger team keep up with maybe some of the younger and more quick skaters, shall we say? And I think we're going to know a lot more after that Western trip as well. But one of the elephants in the room this season is, where does Ovi play? We know that he has played a lion's share of his season playing that first line left wing. But an interesting camp question, where does Ovi actually play? Because, of course, you can put his name on the top line. He's Alex Ovechkin. He has done it his entire career. But that's not necessarily the best answer. That when we look at camp and some of the preseason games, I wouldn't be surprised if Carberry moves Ovechkin around during camp. That we know Dylan Strome has already shown that he can work with him. But I think now the coaching staff has more options in this forward group, right? Tuch can create space with his size. Kyrou gives the line a different element with his speed. And Wilson's physical game can make life easier for Ovechkin when they're working below the goal line. So a lot of moving pieces, excuse me, if you will. And that is why the preseason, the camp, the preseason games are going to be so fun to watch. That is the part that I am looking forward to watching. That Carberry isn't trying to find the line that looks the best on paper. He's trying to figure out where Ovechkin is the most dangerous now. Even if that is not on the first line, and that could change depending on the opponent. So don't lock him into a spot because of what he has been. Find the spot where he's most dangerous today. That is good coaching. But the contract, tells you something. Remember, Ovechkin re-signed on July 2nd. 1 year, $4.25 million cap hit. So he can earn as much as $9 million with all the salaries and bonuses included. But the cap hit is $4.25 million. And I think the contract should tell us a lot. Ovechkin has said the roster and the opportunity to win another Stanley Cup were a major reason for coming back, that he could have got more money somewhere else. He wanted to see what Patrick could put together and if he thought it was good enough to chase down a cup. That this wasn't simply about maximizing the contract. He wanted another opportunity. And well, Patrick and the Capitals did that. So that's why I don't look at this roster and think the Caps are simply celebrating Ovechkin. They're still trying to compete. That when you add Tuch, Kyrou, Jenner, Desharnais, right, the front office looked at the situation and said, we still have a chance. And I agree with that. So to wrap up segment 1 here, so September 10th is the date. That's when the countdown becomes real. Not necessarily the countdown to the end, the countdown to the next chapter. The Caps will already be preparing. The informal skates will be happening. Preseason will be right around the corner, and Ovechkin walks into a roster that is bigger, heavier, and deeper than the one he left. Then comes September 20th, preseason. October 2nd, Carolina. October 3rd, Tampa. And suddenly we're not talking about what might happen anymore. We're watching it happen. That's where we're headed, straight ahead. Keep it right here. Baseball fans, if you think you know who's hitting a homer today, FanDuel is giving you a free chance to call your shot with daily dingers. It's easy to play. Just make your free pick on who you will think will hit a home run in their game. If you're right, you'll receive a profit boost to use on your next bet for a chance at extra winnings. Best of all, you can make a free pick every day throughout the MLB season. Daily dingers is another fun way to stay engaged with every day's games, whether you're following your favorite team or keeping an eye on matchups across the league. Every game game has someone capable of going deep, now you get the chance to make your prediction before first pitch. Now, we do know the Nats are taking on the Rockies, and my pick for a daily dinger is C.J. Abrams. So are you ready to play your game? Join all the action at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com to play daily dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a homer, play ball, and swing for the fences with FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, welcome back into the second segment of Locked On Capitals on your Tuesday edition. In segment 2, we're talking about the rating shift. And this is an interesting one for me. The big takeaway in segment 2 is Ovechkin is no longer the highest rated Capital, and that's actually a pretty good snapshot of where this roster is headed. We take a look at EA Sports. They released their top 300 player ratings for NHL 27, and Ovechkin comes in at what? 89th. Overall, and that matters because for only the second time in his career, he is below 90. But the bigger deal for me, he's not even the highest rated player on the Caps. LT brings home the honor, 90th overall, and if you're an Ovechkin fan like we all are, you might look at that and think, what are we doing here? But I think it's different. I actually think EA got the bigger picture right because this isn't about disrespecting Ovechkin. It's about, just kind of acknowledging how this team has changed. 12 Caps cracked the top 300, and that's the number I care more about than whether Ovechkin is 89 or 90. 12, right? That is quite something because to me, that tells me something about the depth of this team. Thompson, 19, Chychrun and Ovechkin are both at 89, and then you've got Wilson, Tuch at 88, Strome comes in at 87, while Kyrou, Protas, Dubois, and Faravari are all at 86. Sandin and Roy rounded out. There is a lot of NHL talent, and well, that is exactly what Chris Patrick was trying to accomplish. But Thompson, he takes the top. And let's start with Thompson here because I think he's worth it. He comes in 90 overall, which makes him the 5th highest rated goalie in NHL 27. That is behind big names like Vasilevsky, Ilya Sorokin, Connor Hellebuck, and Igor Shesterkin, right? And honestly, when I take a look at that, I am completely fine. And why is that? Because Thompson won 31 games last season. He finished with 2.44 goals against and a .912 save percentage last season. That is legitimate starting goaltender production. And well, if the Caps are going to make a legitimate run at Carolina, they're going to need Thompson to be one of the reasons why. So the goaltending question is much bigger than the EA rating, but the ratings reflect the perception. Thompson is no longer some guy trying to prove he belongs. He's established himself as a legitimate NHL starter. And that is a major change for the Capitals. And then there's Ovechkin, of course, right? 89 overall, number 71 overall in the NHL 27 top 300. And I look at that and I think that is fair. He's still rated higher than a whole bunch of players who are younger, faster, and their physical games, but he is not Connor McDavid or Nathan McKinnon or Nikita Kucherov. McDavid though is only 99 overall player in the game. McKinnon and Kucherov are 97. Cale Makar, Zach Werenski, and Quinn Hughes are 95. Macklin Celebrini is also 95. That is the new NHL. Right? And Ovechkin isn't playing that version of hockey anymore. In September, he's 41. I mean, let's be real here. Still legit, not trying to, besmirch a star on the Capitals, but it is what it is. It's not an insult. It is just reality. The interesting thing is that his production hasn't fallen nearly as dramatically as his overall rating. And that's the disconnect. The video game sees the age. The NHL still has to deal with a shot. And those are two very different things. The ratings on Tuch and Kyrou for me are interesting as well because EA isn't treating these guys like depth additions. Tuch is an 88. Kyrou is an 86. And that is a pretty clear signal that the expectation is for these players to really matter immediately. And I think that's important. We're talking about the Capitals' ceiling, right? If Ovechkin isn't expected to carry the offense the way he once did, the responsibility has got to spread out. That's where those additions really matter. That Tuch gives the Caps another player who can win battles and create room, and Kyrou changes the pace of a line with speed. But when you take a look at it, I don't think that neither one of those players has got to replace Ovechkin. They just have to make it less necessary for Ovechkin to be the guy driving everything. And I think that is important to differentiate. And it's why I actually like this roster better than I did a year ago. The Caps do not need to win the same way anymore. They can win with size. They can win with puck protection, wearing teams down. And then Ovechkin can still step into the power play opportunity or late game scoring chance and remind everybody that his shot still matters at 41. But the reality of the Metro, because let's take the video game out of it here, because the betting market is telling us something similar as well. That Carolina is the overwhelming favorite in the Metro. The Caps are the clear second choice. And that is a disparity. That is a meaningful gap because New Jersey is still viewed as a team in line, but the market isn't convinced that the Devils are on the same level as Carolina and the Capitals. Philadelphia is further back, and I think that is the larger point. The market basically sees two teams at top, Carolina and the Caps. And, well, everybody else, it looks like, is just going to be doing catch-up. Now I'm not telling you to not bet on the Caps. I'm telling you the perception around the league has changed. They're not viewed as some aging team hanging around the periphery, right, around the playoff picture because Ovechkin is still scoring goals. They're viewed as a legitimate contender in the division. And I think that is a big difference, if you ask me. So to wrap up segment 2 here, I don't care that Ovechkin is 89 and NHL 27. What I care about is why he's an 89. Because the Caps aren't supposed to be a one-man team anymore. Thompson is rated higher, Chychrun, Tuch, right? Wilson, they're right there. And, you look at it, there are 12 Caps in the top 300. That tells me what? That this roster has become deeper. And that's exactly what needs to happen if Ovechkin's time in the NHL is approaching the end, because you don't win championships, right, by asking what will be a 41-year-old to carry the entire thing. You win by making sure that he does not have to. And now we get to the real question. Is this actually the final season, or is Ovechkin genuinely waiting to see what happens? That's where we're headed, straight ahead, right here. All right, welcome back into your Tuesday edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So moving into segment 3 here, talking about Ovechkin, and is this the farewell question? And I hate asking it because, well, that is kind of what we're going to hear all season. Ovechkin had it last season. The Capitals signed him to a 1-year deal. And he's going to get those questions again because Ovechkin genuinely doesn't know if this is his final NHL season, and that uncertainty makes the entire year more fascinating. Because here's the thing, we're talking about 26-27 like it's a farewell. It isn't. Not yet. Ovechkin has not said that. And as recently as August 16th, he was asked directly whether this would be his final season. His answer was, quote, "Anything is possible, we'll see," unquote. And when asked about farewell ceremonies, right, and handshake lines, he essentially said he doesn't know yet, that he'll talk about it with his family when he gets back and make a decision. That is the story, that Ovechkin genuinely does not know. And I actually think that that is more important than knowing this is definitely the last year. I don't want 26-27 and all that Chris Patrick has put together by bringing in those big guns to be nothing but a subplot of, is this Ovechkin's final year? But the record is waiting, right? Ovechkin enters the 26-27 season with 929 career goals. He has 1,006 combined regular season and playoff goals. Gretzky finished, of course, with 1,016. So according to my simple math, that is 10 combined difference there. So Ovechkin needs 10 to tie, 11 to beat it. And right, if you're sitting there saying, Dan, he's 41. Yeah, you know what? Guess what? I'm 49. Wait a minute, that's where everything disconnects. I'm not playing hockey, but he also scored 32 goals this past season, played a full NHL season, led the Caps in goals, those kind of things. And he became the first player in NHL history to record 20 30-goal seasons. So there is a reason to believe, I think, that he'll get there. I just don't want to call it inevitable. I think the better way to put it is the goal record feels inevitable, but technically it isn't. The Jack McBain hit of a couple seasons ago that could have turned more serious. What lies ahead in 26-27? I'm not trying to jinx something or saying there's a major injury waiting, but it could happen. 11 goals is a lot if you're injured. If your minutes get cut, if the power play isn't working. And based on what we saw last year, it is a very, reasonable expectation, but also a reason to question what Ovechkin we're going to see. If Ovechkin is 100%, then I say he gets that goal quickly. But like I said, if there's injuries, if his minutes get cut, if that power play isn't working, then it stands to reason it could be a bit longer. What could he score? And it's interesting, I was asked on Locked On NHL, because there's a lot of guys that could hit 30 goals. Tuch, Jenner, you saw Leonard putting up 20. Tom Wilson's in that conversation. It's going to depend on his minutes, right? Of course, to be Captain Obvious here. But I think if he's healthy, I think if the team and the power play are running as it should, I think 30 goals is realistic. I mean, he did it last season. Again, there wasn't the supporting cast, but I think it's possible under certain situations. Not because I'm expecting Ovechkin to turn back the clock. I'm saying it because he just scored 32. There were stretches last season where he looked exactly like the Ovechkin we've known forever. He had multi-goal games after the Olympic break. He scored a hat trick against Utah on March 26th. He finished with 32 goals at the age of 40. So, why would we suddenly project him at 15? I think that would be misguided. I don't see that. But if he stays healthy somewhere around 30-ish, right, I think a little less, a little more is absolutely attainable. And if he scores 30, he finishes with 959 regular season goals, 929 plus 30. And that's where the conversation gets really interesting, because 959 is not 1,000. But, you look at it, it's close enough that when you start wondering whether Ovechkin would really want to walk away at 959, is he trying to just totally fill his mantle with all the accomplishments? That's not me saying he will chase 1,000. I'm saying it becomes a legitimate question. But what happens after this? Because Ovechkin has talked about eventually finishing his playing career back in Russia. Bookend. It started with Dynamo, ended with Dynamo. So I think that is something to factor in. He could decide that passing Gretzky's combined record is the perfect ending, or he could decide he wants another NHL season. He could decide that he wants to finish his playing career back at home. Right now, we don't know. And we're just going to have to leave it that way. And I don't think he really knows at this given moment. That's why I think the most important quote in this entire episode is the simple one, saying, quote, anything is possible, we'll see, unquote. Is he healthy? Do the Capitals look better than they did last year? That's why it's uncertain. We want to have certainty. I want certainty. I thought I had certainty, but we don't know. If he's healthy, the team plays well, I wouldn't rule it out for him coming back to, one or more seasons. But that quote right there, that isn't someone announcing a retirement. I think that is someone leaving the door open. And I think that ultimately we should just take him at his word. But the farewell tour question, it is a fair one, I got to say, because that is one of the reasons I thought he did not want to come back. Because he, almost assuredly will get that farewell tour this year. We already saw the jersey exchange, right? And all the pomp and circumstance, if you will, that surrounded Ovechkin last year. that signing a 1-year deal, I think he's still going to get that farewell tour, even though he doesn't want it. That is what he's going to get. He's tried to kind of change everyone's perception by saying maybe 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 years. I mean, I don't think he really means that, but what I think he's trying to do is take the limelight and the pressure off of him trying to give a definitive answer. But you take a look at it, in some ways his career has followed Gretzky's, the goal chase. Ovechkin has admired the way Gretzky handled his own retirement. No giant year-long farewell tour. Of course, it's different. There wasn't social media back then. No manufactured goodbyes every single night. One final celebration, one final game, and that's it. I think that fits Ovechkin to a T, especially after what happened in Pittsburgh last season, right? The Penguins staying on the ice for a ceremonial handshake and Ovechkin, waving him off. He was not ready for that moment. He made it clear that he hadn't decided what he wanted to do. And that tells me everything. If Ovechkin does eventually decide that it is, I don't expect him to suddenly become interested in a massive farewell production. Maybe he does. But it doesn't feel on brand for who Ovechkin is. He seems much more likely to decide how his ending is going to look than simply do it. But his role is changing, right? And talking about the role that he plays on the ice. And here's where I want to be more precise. It's not Ovechkin saying, I'm going to play fewer minutes. It's Spencer Carberry acknowledging that Ovechkin could play fewer minutes while remaining a very productive NHL player. And I think that makes more sense to me because, right, the Caps don't need Ovechkin to be a 25-year-old Ovechkin. It would be nice for all of us to turn back the clock. I would love to be 25 again. They need him to be the best version of the 26-27 Ovechkin. That means finding the spots where his shot can still change games, right, without asking him to carry every possession. Carberry has already said that he is willing to adjust Ovechkin's usage, and the deeper forward group gives him more freedom to do just that without weakening the lineup. And that is a difference between this season and previous seasons. Strome can still give Ovechkin the familiarity they've developed. Strome has had to play a big role in Backstrom's departure from this team. And while the additions around him allow Carberry to change the look when he needs more speed and size. And that is the part that I really want to watch because Carbs isn't trying to find the team that looks the best on paper. He's trying to figure out where Ovechkin is the most dangerous. And that could be dependent on the opponent, right? Don't lock him into a spot because of what he was. Find the spot where he is the most dangerous. And I think that is the most crucial part of all of this. So to wrap up on segment 3, here's where I land. The goal record feels inevitable, but technically it isn't. The bigger question is what happens after Ovechkin passes it, because he genuinely doesn't know. And that's not a problem. That is the story. The season could be his farewell. It could also be the season that leads to one final decision. But either way, the Caps have built a roster that suggests they're not treating this as a goodbye tour. They're treating it trying to win while Ovechkin is still here. And that is the most important thing because the best possible ending isn't a ceremony. It's Ovechkin playing meaningful hockey in April. If the Caps are winning games when the pressure is at its highest, if this roster is giving him a chance to go out competing for something, that's the ending that everybody actually wants. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You, my friends, are what makes this show successful. Now on video, we send you to the first ever Locked On Sports Today 24/7 YouTube channel. And on audio, check out Locked On NHL for your second listen. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. My name is Dan HOLMI, and I'll talk to you again next time.